I've got all kinds of questions for you. I always
Good.
prepare. I've always got more questions than we'll ever get through on the show because I live in fear of the person who says yes, no, yes, no, yes, and then I'm done. I don't have any more questions. But my main
People don't really do that to you, do they?
no, it hasn't. It's only happened once so far. Fortunately, I'm talking mostly with authors and publishing people who tend to be very verbose, so it works out.
Yeah.
And I keep getting, I can't believe the luck I've had with so many of the wonderful guests that have come on. I keep thinking that sooner or later it's going to be the Wizard of Oz, and they find out it's just a guy behind the curtain, and then this whole thing's done. And fair
That's
enough.
you.
I'll be happy I got along with it, got away with it for as long as I did.
I love that. That's funny.
So your podcast is canceled, sir. You were way out of your league. I was the whole time. I was just waiting for you to notice. Fair enough.
You were an imposter. What we all fear.
Aren't we all?
Yeah, I think so, pretty much. Yeah.
That's what I find funny is I keep talking to people that I would think that, like, if there's a moment you can reach where you had that total author zen that, oh, I'm all successful, I'm all knowing, I can be calm now, it would be this person or that person. And I keep finding, no, it's not true for them. I don't think it's true for anybody. If it is, it's probably somebody who is woefully unaware of how far they have yet to go, I'm sure.
That is true. That is true. I think feeling that way is such a part of the momentum for the writing, you know, is maybe not even a conscious way, but you know, that, I mean, this is a process, not even each book, but our whole careers, I think, is a process. And to me, that's what, you know, that's what drives us is, you know, okay, yeah, well, that was my past work. And now what am I going to do? And am I going to do it right? And, you know, or will I just feel as new as I ever was at this? You know, I think every time I sit down to start a project, it feels new. And I go back right back to my old insecurities, but, you know, mostly doing the work is the answer to all of that, right? That's the unraveling.
Just sitting down every day and getting after it, and then that centers you and makes you feel calm about writing, or no, not at all. It just, you have to keep going while feeling not centered.
No, I mean, I don't think about the centering too much. I just think about, oh, what needs to be said next, you know? And that, I guess, is its own kind of centering. You know, what was that scene I was in yesterday, and where did, you know, and what follows, or else, or even in my case, since I write out of order, what's down the line, and what can I write, you know, what's something I know, because that will feel easier to write if I know a scene is coming, and then I can kind of write to it, you know, I fill myself to it. And every once in a while I realize, oh, you know, there wasn't really that much between that last scene and this scene. So that's good, because, you know, I always think that can, you know, a book should be told with few words instead of tons of words. So when my novels start getting long, I start wanting to trim them back, you know.
So you're in a hurry to finish, so that one, it'll be less words you have to cut, and two, you can get down to the real work of shaping them and cutting them down a bit.
Yeah, exactly. I sort of do that as I go anyway. When I look at yesterday's work, for instance, I'll see a lot that can be cut, just a lot that can be, you know, that can be told in a shorter sentence, or in a, you know, or where I've actually sort of said it two different ways. This is something I find in a lot of writers. You know, sometimes when I'm mentoring somebody, I'll say, oh, you know, you've told us two clever ways. It's the same thing, two clever ways. So I do that too. Choose one. You know, choose one so that it has more impact on the page. You know, because you want to keep your reader happy, and I think that making them impatient with you is not what we want to do, especially with young audiences. You know,
such a great point. I feel that this should definitely be the start of the show. Hi there, esteemed audience. Welcome to Middle Grade Ninja. I'm your host, Rob Kent. This is my guest, Leslie Connor. And you start with the end of your story in mind. Is that every story, or is that just your new novel, Anybody Here Seen Frenchie, which is available now, or soon will be, esteemed audience?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I'm excited to be here, obviously, wiggling in my chair a lot. You know, that was actually a little unusual for me to kind of hear the ending of a book that way. Well, and I didn't know exactly what it was I was hearing. And I, just for the audience, what I'm referring to is that, you know, this book began with a 3x5 card that I keep by the side of my bed. And just before sleeping, I came out of that semi-conscious state and wrote down two things, and knowing that if I didn't write them down, I would not remember them in the morning. And when I went back to them, I saw on the card that it said flapping and tweeting and a bowl in the earth, And it took me a little bit longer to realize that to me is an ending, and I've got to get on this journey now. So I've usually been kind of thinking about a situation, you know how sometimes we're asked, what should you write? Should you write what you know? Should you write what you want to know? And my answer to that has always been, I write what I can't ignore. I figure if this thing sticks to me, and I do it right, then it'll probably stick to the reader as well. And so if it's of interest to me, it will be of interest to the reader. So I trust in that blindly when I write. I just say it has to be so, and that's where the starts come from for me. Get the situation, and then that usually comes from some aspect of real life, because I mostly write realistic fiction. That's sort of my wheelhouse, my genre, middle grade as well. And so that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking to kind of discover why some event or something I saw keeps sticking to me. What's the story that I've been inventing around it? And that's what gets me going. So yeah, with anybody here seen Frenchie, it was a little unusual to have these two funny little fragments be the end. That's not always my process. Do any of us ever have exactly the same process? I sort of doubt it. But I knew it did kind of make me realize what I was writing toward, and what does this mean, and why am I so attached to it the next morning? That kind of thing. So yeah, interesting.
It's funny, even when I've written sequels, the process is still not the same.
Good point. Yeah, this is something you know about for sure. Yeah, I do think.
It's not the same book, but it's the same characters, it's the same type of feeling. So why is this not going smoother?
Yeah,
figuring it out on the fly.
Yeah, because I think, like any of us, it's a whole new day. It's a whole new day for that character. Anything can happen. The troubles are new, new to them. And that's, I imagine with sequel writing, that's where you're at. I have done no sequel writing. I only think about my books later and wonder, and kind of imagine what the characters are up to. And I sort of leave my readers to do the same. So I have not written any series or any sequels. I've been asked to by the readers, but I think mostly my books stop and stand alone. I kind of admire those who can do sequels and who can do series. So I think I loved that when I would find that as a kid, but I haven't seemed to have been able to give that back. So.
Is that something that you have like on your writer's bucket list at some point, a series or at least one sequel that speaks to you?
I don't even have it. Not really. I think I kind of know now what it is I do, and I have almost, I've really never strongly considered writing a sequel. And I have a couple of stories that have ended where there's quite a bit that still could happen. It's sort of interesting how you look back and say, there's really a lot sitting on the table that could still happen, with that book. But most of them feel finished to me. And I feel like I just want, I love it when a kid will write me the next chapter after my final one. I love that sense of having left the reader with my job, leave the reader playing the part of the writer, which is, it's just a great skill to be able to. It means they're imagining. It means that things came to life for them enough that they think that there's a continuation. That's a really big compliment when a kid does that for you.
Oh yeah, that's tremendous. They're so involved in the world. They want to keep it going. And when that happens, I mean, obviously, what's on the page is what's on the page, but you keep thinking about the characters afterward. Do you have some sort of definitive answers in the back of your mind after a book ends as to what happened? What happened next?
I bet I could probably tell you for each book, I would say. I think since we're writing middle grade, maybe you think about this too, is, the one place I won't leave us off is I mean, or I never intentionally leave us off, is with anything with a bleak feeling about it. There's always going to be hope at the end. There's always going to be a future that I've tried to, tried to give glimpses of, where you get the sense of where this character will go. I like leaving them okay. I think that that's the most fair thing to do. And I don't know, who wants a drag of an ending anyway? If you can leave them with adventure, that, for series writers, I imagine that there still has to be sort of something unresolved. But I like to leave it where it's not wrapped up perfectly in a bow. And I don't think that things have to be, I mean, what's perfect anyway, but where you have a sense of hope and you can imagine, the good things for the character, who I've usually taken through quite a patch of hell before, but by the time I get them to the end of their story,
Do
throw a
you
lot of rocks in.
putting your characters through a little bit of hell because you know that's going to be good storytelling, or do you feel incredibly guilty and you apologize as you do it?
Oh, I cry as I do it. I mean, it can be really heart-wrenching, but sometimes I think you're kind of working with that proverbial ball of clay, and you have to kind of stay true to it. It's like certain things are going to be expected, and that's how you keep your reader. You provide tension. It's so basic, so simple, so basic. There has to be enough reason to, for the reader to follow them. I do think that my stories are character driven. I work a lot harder on plot than I do on character or voice. And I always avoided conflict, as a person. And so maybe I'm sort of living that out here. It's like, oh, we're going to have some conflict. We're definitely going to, we're going to figure out how you resolve that, so my books are, teasing knots a lot.
Is it teasing nuts?
Teasing out the knots.
Oh,
Teasing out a knot in your life, teasing things out, working things out, whereas, I think maybe by the way I was raised, I was sort of taught to, walk away from conflict and that kind of thing. Yeah, there's a time to do that, I suppose, but it's a lot more interesting to watch somebody work through something.
yeah, in an ideal world, my personal life is just the most boring ho-hum. I'm completely at ease and calm, and my characters, oh my God, what's going on with them? You wouldn't even believe it.
Yes, oh, I know. Yeah, that's so cool.
What gets a little bit hectic is when my life is a little bit complicated. And then, and I see some of that beginning to be reflected in the character situation as well, kind of mirroring back to me. Oh, well, I don't know how to work out this problem in real life, but you, character, I can figure this out for you.
Absolutely. And do you find I'm turning this on you now. So here's a question for you. Do you find that you yourself sort of mentally taking note of the feelings you're having, of what your body is doing when you're in those times of chaos, and then being able to kind of tap back into that for your characters? I do that consciously now. I say, okay, this feels awful. Let me think, what am I experiencing here? And I kind of sometimes scribble down some notes, and then I just go back to the memory, and then write the angst into the scene, from my own, sort of from my own experience. And it doesn't have to be exactly the same thing happening, but just, you are devastated by something, and what does devastation really feel like? All different levels of that, but I find myself doing that.
Yeah, there was a moment. This is not a middle grade friendly movie, but I don't care. It's a great one. In the Blair Witch Project, as the they're recording themselves, and as things are getting out of control, one of them turns on Heather Donahue is the main character. You're trying to control this. You're still trying to make your movie and pretend this isn't happening to you. And I felt 100% called out of that moment because that's how I approach some conflict in my life. Like, oh, I'm just preserving this memory for later when I'm going to write it down. So it's perfectly safe. I'm an observer here. There's no problem.
Right, right. So true. So true. Yeah. It also helps me sort of get through those daily things. I mean, I think this is where, writing is sort of connected to spirit. And you know, okay, if I can slow myself down enough to say, okay, what's happening right now is really stinky or is super joyful, whichever. And just, to tell myself, ooh, make sure you let your writer self get involved in this a little bit so that you don't forget the feelings of it. And so very cool. It's
Well,
part of the joys.
I don't find myself doing that when it's a joyful occasion. Like on my wedding day, I was like, well, this is just for us and all of our
Yeah.
family here. And I won't save this for later. I wasn't thinking about writing it all. It's just when, well, oh, I'm in so much pain. I need to remember this physical pain I'm feeling so I can describe it perfectly in a book. And in some ways, that makes this noble, what I'm experiencing right now.
There you go. Useful anyway.
Yeah. When once the pain's over, if I'm honest with myself, I could have just Googled it or watched a YouTube video of somebody else's pain, and that probably would have sufficed.
You think so? Oh man, see, I see not the same unless something has me weeping. I mean, the work of other writers often does that for me. It's like, ooh, wow, that scene really got to me. Whether it's movie or whether it's on film or in a book, it's like, ooh, that was, I really felt that. It was great.
Well, you were saying brilliant things about writing, and I knew I would never ask you the right question to unlock it again. So we got kind of a rolling start there. But I did want to take a moment for esteemed audience who hasn't been reading about you all day and preparing for an interview. You've listened to the show before, so I never summarize anybody else's biography or anybody else's book. What should esteemed audience know about Leslie Connor?
Oh my gosh. I don't know. I feel like I'm feel like I'm a face behind my books, not before them, which I don't know, that doesn't describe much, does it? So I think one of the notable things I'm thinking about this because I'm going to do a career day at the high school next week. One notable thing I think is that I did not set out to be a writer. And that is sort of interesting to me. What I did set out to be was an artist, a visual artist. And in fact, I really kind of came to children's book writing through the illustrator door, I thought. So yeah, I have my degree is in art, not in writing. And when I completed the degree, I took like a local adult education class with a local writer because I knew I wanted to pair writing and illustrating. But I think I never thought that the writing world was something I could really touch. I really felt like that was something that was going to be harder. But it turned out to be just reverse for me. The writing actually came much more easily to me, and I leave almost no evidence behind that I ever entered as an illustrator. I immediately discovered that I had like a middle grade voice that I wanted to explore. And yeah, as soon as I acknowledged that, it was kind of, I did a little genre hopping in the beginning, and I had my first book was a picture book, not illustrated by me. I'll show you. I actually, blew the dust off this. It's out of print and everything, but I wrote Miss Bridie Chose a Shovel, and it was illustrated by Mary Azarian, who, if you know, is a Caldecott medalist. And it was a great experience. It was really funny because some of the sketches in my book, the scenes that I made were very similar to what Mary ended up doing, only she did it with her beautiful woodcuts and her expertise. And so that ended up being a great entry in. But even by the time that book came out, I realized that, I was sort of encouraged by the responses I was getting to pick my picture book texts through the rejection process, and by a local author who was leading the class, to consider that some of my work sounded like it wanted to be longer works of fiction. And it kind of didn't acknowledge it initially. And then I thought, well, why am I saying no to this when I know that I have this like kind of YA or middle grade thing running through my mind? And why don't I just go home and try? And, I sat down and 1,500 words later, I had really made a start on something that, of course, wasn't publishable, but it was definitely good practice. So I think saying that I didn't come to this through, a writer's degree or an MFA kind of pathway is I think sort of interesting. I think of Elizabeth Gilbert with Big Magic, and she said, you can learn from so many different places, and it's applying yourself and and doing this work and discovering that you have voice, and that's big. So yeah, I guess that I didn't plan to do this is sort of the most significant thing I can tell you about myself as a writer. That's really going to be a little different than what you usually hear.
It's going well.
Oh my goodness.
I had
well, it's true though. It's the truth.
Well, I had read that when you were young and you were living outside of I'm gonna mutilate this with my Indiana pronunciation, Schenectady, New York.
You got it.
Had worked for a company that sold some of the finest printing papers in all the land, and then he brought home these big, beautiful books that were so heavy that they pinned you to your chair when you held them in your lap.
Yep.
That struck me. There had to be a huge influence on you from a young age of steering you toward books.
Oh yeah, definite book love, definitely. Even I was a little bit of a reluctant reader though, interestingly enough, but a lot of these books were these beautiful archival books of things like the Audubon books and and other really well-known graphic designers and things. So I was looking at a lot of imagery. And I have a feeling that, for me, anytime I see something, I and this is when I should have acknowledged I was a writer a long time ago, I automatically start to, go all starfish brain and start creating the story, which, made it very hard to be, for instance, a social studies student as a kid and trying to follow a history book. When I would come upon some cool detail or something, my mind immediately wanted to create its own story around it. And of course, that wasn't what the facts were. And so when you get to the multiple choice test, you're going to have a really hard time if you really just made up the story and didn't find out what the facts were. But that's me. I love to take, some kind of thing, image, anything like that, and then grow it. And I mean, these books that we had access to were really neat, and they really weren't kid books, really. They're just all different things, there were famous designers like Ivan Shemaev and Saul Bass and gosh, I can't even name any more. I can't come up with them off the top of my head, but the smell of their ink on the page and these bold images and often sort of strange images, often you'd be turning it this way and that way and giving it a good look, to decide. But those were the kind of books I spent a long time with. And yeah, they were big, heavy books, and they held you down to your chair. No tiny type to deal with. I have a feeling I would have played a big type. And then, we were a family that read too. I mean, picture books are still one of my favorite things. And there were 4 of us growing up. And so we had nightly picture book readings, as I recall. And then, as the siblings, my older siblings would then read to us. My sister in particular was really a great caretaker of the rest of us. And so we were always read to and had favorite books, still do. I kind of confiscated all the family books and funny story. So my grandpa went to school with Theodore Geisel. And so we have books from Dr. Seuss that had been signed to my dad and his brother and his sister from all those years ago. So I kind of have those too. And we were, we sort of knew at a young age that they were kind of collector's items or whatever, but it wasn't like we weren't allowed to touch them. They were, you could play with the books, you could open the books, you couldn't color in them, but you could play with them.
That's I don't even know what that would be worth. I mean, you'd have to seek out some collectors to find out.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, it's really neat. It's really interesting to see, And of course, you talk about old stories. Now you were talking about stories being looked at very differently now than they were before. We're more analytical about what was being handed to us. And of course, Dr. Seuss and, and even in the story, stories like Babar, they're very racist. There are very racist elements in them. So, there's that reckoning too.
Yeah, that was before the rush start of the podcast. When we were talking about writing, I had mentioned that previous guest Kyle Lukoff had disillusioned me about one of my favorite novels by Roald Dahl. And I had accepted that The Witches was sexist, but he pointed out why it was also racist as well, and many other concerning elements that made me say, oh, that makes me sad. And it makes me sad not just in, oh, I was a child and I loved that story and now I'm an adult and I have to, when I mentioned how much I love this story, I have to bring up first this little preface that, hey, it was a different time. It wasn't that different though. Yeah. Somebody in the editorial office should have stopped Mr. Dahl and said, hey, you know what, maybe we do another pass at this before we publish it, but whatever. The other thing about that makes me a little bit concerned, and maybe this is a shared concern for you as well, is this idea that Roald Dahl, despite being obviously very flawed, was a product of his time. There were plenty of racist, sexist people during that time. They didn't all write Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. The man had the gift of storytelling. And so it worries me a little bit that if a man that objectively brilliant, at least in terms of telling stories, can be that far off and that wrong and now kind of paying a price for it, well, I mean, he's dead. I don't know if this bothers him at all or not. But in terms of his fiction, that we do have to qualify when we talk about Roald Dahl, those things that are also true about him. Does that worry you? It worries me a little bit that as readers continue to progress, by definition, they will have progressed and they will be smarter. They will know more. If they're looking back at things I've written at all, just by definition of how far they've gone, they're going to be lacking. They won't be caught up. And I hate to judge writers of the past too harshly for not knowing what they didn't know, knowing that theoretically my time is coming. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of us thinking about that. One of my favorite podcasts besides yours is Book Friends Forever, which is Grace Lynn and Albina Ling, and Grace discusses having written a book that she wishes she hadn't done or wouldn't do now. And I think that that's true. I have one, well, let me think. I have, when we get to ghosts, I had a book called Dead on Town Line that's out of print now. I also had a book called The Things You Kiss Goodbye. And it was a little bit of a departure for me. It was more of a YA book. And, it's about a girl in an abusive relationship. And what I thought was, it's sort of a good sign for the world and yet wasn't great for me, was I think that the readers felt very impatient with her. They said, she's an idiot. She lets this guy beat her up and she, and lets her push him around. And I think that it was hard for them to reconcile. And I know that book, for instance, would never survive the Me Too movement. It would be looked at as really, really dusty now, and it should be. Still kind of a good read in its own way, but there would be a real impatience with it because we've, had movement. We continue to raise our conscience, and I think that that's positive. But yeah, you do wonder, what's going to be my reckoning? What have I what have I put in a book? Even phrases I worry about sometimes, because some of them I think kind of they may have some phrases that we use a lot have roots in something that we didn't realize they had, what was the roots, like circling the wagons is really not, I mean, that's really not something that we want to put in a book anymore. That's a reference that we don't want to make. So anyway, I mean, I think it's an ongoing thing. And I think I don't know, for me, I don't know how you feel about this, but I think that acknowledging that you might have written it differently is the step, is the only step, the only action that you have to take. It's in print. You can ask for it to be, not reprinted, I suppose, if you feel really strongly about it, or, that kind of thing. But, I mean, everybody, probably a lot of people have something like that, I think. And yeah, I do sometimes think about it. I do worry, have I handled this right? And in writing about autism, I had a lot to learn, a lot to become aware of. And I desperately wanted to get that right. And I hope I have, but I think it remains to be seen. I want the community, when the community reads it, we'll see, right? This is scary. It's a scary job.
Well, theoretically, if I take myself completely out of it, the fact that society will have progressed to the point that they recognize this thing that was commonplace now is not okay, it outweighs my need to have been right all along. Like it's better really that society has progressed forward. I hope.
Definitely, and that's very well said. Well said.
Had provided us with a perfect transition to talk about one of my new favorite books, Anybody Here Seen Frenchie, which I should remind esteemed audience is either available now or soon will be, so you can be pre-ordering your copy, and in a few days it will be available for you. And as promised, I will not summarize your book, so tell esteemed audience what they need to know about Frenchie so we could talk a little bit about it.
Oh, sure. Anybody Here Seen Frenchie is a story really of a friendship, into my way of thinking. It's most of the chapters, there are multiple points of view, but most of the chapters are from Aurora Pauline Petriquin, who is a really loud, impulsive kind of kid. She's actually kind of had trouble making and keeping friends over the years because she's just so out there and just kind of exuberant. But the book has her in she opens with her in 6th grade, but come 3rd grade she flashes back to when she met Frenchie Livernois, who moved in to the house next door, actually. And Frenchie was really kind of her new shot at a friendship. Frenchie is non-vocal and autistic, although I don't really say that much about it in the book. I'm mostly looking at the behaviors, which is a thing I do. I really like to kind of paint the character on the page and let that stand without doing a lot of labeling. So he just sort of silently chooses Aurora for his person and follows her about, and she really becomes what I call psychologically responsible for Frenchie. She looks out for him, but he does okay himself. And in fact, when they hike around in the inland areas of Maine, they do live in a coastal town, but they often spend a lot of time in the woods. Now he's often the one who knows his way home, and she'll be likely to wander around and get not really lost, but just a little off track. And he always makes it home first. That's one of the things that she notices. But what was on my mind is that with a friendship of that kind, what happens when these are two kids who are probably being given strategies to kind of socialize them. That seems to be an all important thing in middle school. And for me, I was asking myself, what happens when those strategies begin to work better for one friend than for the other? Or what about just a kid who's going to grow into her place on the spectrum, whereas another is going to stay, not change as much. And of course, that's kind of the setup for her becoming distracted one day and Frenchie not turning up to his classroom. She usually would be the one that would turn and kind of loop him in and say, we're going this way now, you know. And he's, of course, very geared to pattern and to being able to predict what his day is going to be like. You know, there are a lot of things. She says he gets a lot of things and he's used to a lot of things. Even though he doesn't speak, he will know what's coming next and he will follow. And, you know, but she's one of the people who can really get through to him. He's also got this connection to birds. And so she'll often use a bird sound or a reference to birds to get him to do the things she wants to do. She's very much an outdoor kid, and you know, that's one of the reasons that they hang around in the natural world so much. But yeah, she misses something, and he wanders away from the school one day, and then this search ensues, and so the story really becomes about, you know. For me, one of my other questions was, how do people become lost, and how do they stay lost? You know, sometimes when I'm watching these shows on TV, I think to myself, you know, what did someone in the community miss that they might have seen even out of the corner of their eye, but just not register or just not think was important? You know, it may be until later in the search or something where it dawns on them that they saw something. And what about someone who saw something but isn't telling, or maybe can't tell what they saw? And so that's how, you know, this title, Anybody Here Seen Frenchie, kind of has two meanings, because Aurora feels that Frenchie is kind of ignored at school too, or not seen by the other kids, that they don't read his behavior the way she has learned to. And so when he actually goes missing, then that's when that title kind of has two meanings to it. So yeah, it's about and it's largely about a community getting together. And this is where the multiple points of view come in, which I had such a great time writing. I mean, just writing a little passage about what was distracting someone from seeing the boy who entered the field right behind them, you know, that was fascinating for me. And then, you know, one thing that I like to share about this book, I still only have the arc, so this wasn't the finished. I used maps a lot when I was writing this book. I had a whole thing out, and I sent this messy map, you know, into my editor, and the illustrator who did such a beautiful job on the cover also did this incredible map that I think kids are going to really enjoy seeing how it was that people missed where Frenchie was. And I kind of can't wait to hear feedback on that from them. So yeah, just, I don't know, just kind of slipping down inside a bunch of different characters to feel their feels and write their parts, you know. Kind of like that business of imagining a memoir, you know, imagining that you were there during that time, and that you are that person experiencing that thing. And when you're hunting for a missing friend, I think that that's a lot of emotion.
Well, as you were describing the novel, there is a plot. There's a very not a straight line, but there's obvious conflict that's introduced, and we're following right along. But you started with character, and mostly you stayed with character. And so I'm curious, because we said originally that this starts as not a dream, but a notion that you have, that you're writing on the 3x5 card, flapping and tweeting a bull in the earth, and that's your end. So how from that do you get that it's the characters and that it's going to be Frenchie and Aurora?
Right. Well, Frenchie, as I said, has this connection to birds, and one of the few sounds or motions that he makes is he'll flap and then make a tweeting sound when he has seen a bird. And Sometimes Aurora has not seen the bird with him, but other times she has. And it's just one of the things that he acknowledges in a way that that the rest of the world can read as, oh, that means he saw a bird. So I think, for me, it was a visual. I saw him flapping and doing this, sort of sound, a bird sound. So that it was an automatic connection to character. And the other, I think, was about, just kind of, I keep referring to sort of the natural world and this bowl in the earth. I don't think it's really a big spoiler to say they visit a quarry at one point, and that is the thing. And I went and hiked a couple of different places, but a particular quarry in Maine. And, I was photographing it and thinking, this is very beautiful and very dangerous. It's an abandoned quarry, of course. I mean, not inactive. And it was so interesting to see the way nature was taking back the rock, for me anyway. Little pine trees managing to find root on these ledges, and yet the man-made drilling of holes. I guess they put something akin to rebar or something in to hold things while they make a cut or something. I didn't find out a lot about granite harvesting, but I certainly saw the evidence of it, which was interesting. But I think there are a lot of times I think quarries do feature in stories as being sort of something that has incredible depth and darkness to it. And the temperature down center of a quarry can be really dangerously low because of how they're fed, the water source. Also because quarries have been sort of filled with artifacts of the past, everything from bed springs to the netting that they used for the blasting, which was metal and dangerous, and the grout, or it's called, or tiny exploded rock, is quite sharp too, and can be loose and slidey. And I thought, yeah, there's all kinds of havoc that could happen here. So that's what I was looking at, and I was thinking, I love the beauty of this, and I love its danger as well in terms of being a writer and looking for a setting in a story. So that's how those two things ended up figuring in. I knew I needed to go see the quarries to understand this bowl in the earth feeling. So
you hike, I think you said you hike or ski there every morning before you start writing. So are you out?
Yeah.
Are you out looking for places where Frenchie might have gone and kind of plan? I mean, obviously you're not in Maine, but
right. I'm not in Maine now. I'm in Connecticut, but I visit Maine every year. And I went back to Maine kind of in the off season, in the shoulder season, to really research this book, because I'd never really been there in September, which is the month that the story takes place. And there were differences in the light and in the temperature and in the color of the foliage and things like that it just really got, I wanted to get right. And in some cases, since they were searching, the amount of sunlight left was of utmost importance, and I wanted to know what the slant of that was, what was the color of pink like, and what time would everything be happening. And so there I am out there just waiting for it to get dark, and kind of watching the sun go down, and the darkness behind me, or the light behind me, whichever thing was happening. So I felt it was really important. It's also just looking for what like I say, what was turning in terms of ferns and things like that, what was going on, and just the quietness of Maine when there wasn't a lot of traffic on Route 1 in the summer, things like that. Just a feel for that was important, I thought. So I was, they're taking tons of photographs. couple of Septembers ago now.
How precise do you feel you need to be when you're describing setting? I often think of Avi, nice name drop, but when Avi was on here, he was talking about writing historical fiction. He would look up the weather on the day, and he's writing, something that happened 100 years ago. And I'm thinking, nobody's going to catch that. And he's like, well, no, I'll know.
Yeah, yeah.
Know what the weather was on the day that I'm describing. Do you feel the need to where are you comfortable slipping into fiction and saying, well, I'll write what it needs to be for the story versus this is a real location. I know I'm describing exactly. If you go there, you're going to see exactly what Frenchie and Aurora are seeing.
Yeah, in terms of place, is such a good question. In terms of place, I'm usually looking pretty closely at it. I prefer usually not to name specific towns. I'll often change the name of a town, but it will be based on a place. And what I find is that when I'm doing something like referring to maps and things, often that's where the goodies are. You know, that the true things about it are gifts. You know, routes and trails and what I find out sort of what's there for me that works in my favor, and really I could really use that. I suppose I exploit it to some degree. What I avoid in terms of truth oftentimes is, if there's really a certain house or something at a certain corner, I might change the name of a road or something because I don't want anybody to be bothered. That was inspired by this, didn't use it precisely, made some changes, who knows why. And then, I love when they get in touch with me and I tell them why, because I didn't want anybody to, think that that's who really lived there. I didn't want them to think I was writing about any real person. You don't want something, you didn't want anybody's privacy invaded, even though you weren't writing about them. If something comes real enough for somebody, they could make assumptions that are not right. And so, that for me is my caution with place. Yeah, and the rest of it, I had to be following full moon. The moon for another book that I wrote, A Home for Goddesses and Dogs. There are moons on the cover of this book. That was really important because the girl, a recently orphaned girl, her mom was kind of a practicing pagan and was very interested in the different kinds of moons and what they would mean and what attention we should be paying to them. So I had to kind of get them right. And I had to sort of choose a specific year and stick with that calendar because, well, the copy editor comes back at you with that stuff anyway. So they're fact checking and that kind of thing. But and so I can see why Avi, who I adore, would need to. I think for historical fiction, I think that we are. I think we owe our readers the truth on that. I do think it's important for that. I really do.
Yeah, most writers I've talked to do. Which is
why is that right?
The greatness of Avi is probably beyond me.
And me. And me. He's a fascinating storyteller, isn't he? So great.
So you've got an ending in mind, you've got your setting that's coming clearly into focus. So when does it come to you that these are going to be specifically Aurora and Frenchie, and that they're both going to be somewhere on the autism spectrum?
I don't know if I remember precisely how that happened, but I knew I had this, loud girl in my ear. I always feel like, the tone of the book and the voice kind of comes in through my writer's ear, and I begin to sort of hear them chattering about. In this case, it was so interesting that I had one character that was non-vocal. And by the way, we refer to him as non-vocal because he actually, we can't say he's nonverbal because he apparently does process language to some degree because he can carry out a command if he tunes in, and he responds to being spoken to. But he doesn't speak, so therefore, not non-vocal. So and I think I was thinking about friendships. I have known, we probably all have, I kind of have observed just the difference for a kid who's on the spectrum in different ways. And of course, I've had them in my I've had, you know, really brilliant kids who can write, who were probably on the spectrum, who were in my different teen writing classes and things like this. And sometimes they tell me all about it, and other times they don't. But you know, you can kind of sense out how socially the other kids aren't sure how to interact with them. They aren't sure how to be included, and you know, and yet there's an ebb and flow, and often years down the line, it's all kind of it is all kind of ironed out and is all working. Or you know, and I think that we teach acceptance now much more than we used to. And you know, I always say, you know, really, you know, we're all little weirdos, and so that I think is, you know, I think that's great that we're acknowledging, you know, and celebrating our differences, and you know, it just leaves so much more room for everyone to accomplish what they want to accomplish, have a fulfilling life, and be contributors. You know, that's the thing. I think that's when most of us are at our happiest, when we can be contributors. And that's what I want, you know, I guess that's kind of the thing I wanted for Aurora. If I think about a character that, you know, what do I want for her as I write about her? What do I think she craves, whether she's super conscious of it or not? What would be the thing what would be the great gift to give her? And I think that, you know, mattering, making a difference. It's, you know, I saw a kid with I knew she was a good-hearted kid, you know. So, yeah, you know, I think that what happens is all the characters are kind of composites of various people I've known or read about or can imagine. You know, it kind of comes from those three places, and always as composites. Yeah, so I just knew that this was something I was interested in. The friendship interested me, as I said. Yeah, it is so hard to put into words when it becomes, you know, when it becomes exactly about those characters. But boy, once they're really there and they've attached themselves to the situation, the burbling is pretty loud and pretty constant. It's not very organized. I would never be an organized writer. But that's when I can start sort of, you know, I often start with listing scenes, scenes that I know are going to happen in this book. And they don't even have to be the super pivotal scenes. It's just something I know about these two characters, an interaction that they had or something. And those I find get sort of meatier and meatier as I list them and make them and spend some time writing them. Some scenes become not important enough to include, but maybe just something I needed to know. And they can be very short things, and I find myself reordering the scenes then, and that's like in the beginning of the process. And then there comes this point about a third of the way through where, okay, now we're going to kind of go from this 1/3 point, and we're going to kind of have a through write. And then usually somewhere around 2/3, I really hear the final scene, and I'll go ahead and I'll write it. And that gives me this trajectory to aim for, so that I think I get a better feeling about the middle, you know, which can get weighty and soggy and wet and sometimes long, you know, and that helps me keep that tight if I know, okay, and I do sometimes think to myself, okay, writer, shortest path there, don't drag this out, don't do that, you know, because I sometimes feel like my books get too long, you know. I would love to, I mean, I keep landing around 320 for pages, and I'd love to land more like 220. I think a lot of the stories could be told in that many, but then again, you know, from art school I learned, you know, how long did it take you to make that painting? It took as long as it took. You know, I had a professor who would not let us talk about that, you know. So, and then in the revision process, we can still trim. So, yeah. And sometimes my editor will make suggestions for that, you know.
So, I mean, you've got a list of scenes? Do you sit down and
Yeah.
write like a character sheet? This is everything that's true of Aurora. This is everything that's true of every other character in the story. Do you do that, or do you get to know them as you're writing about them?
I might keep a little 3x5 card on each person, and it has more to do with something I see them doing. So again, it's kind of scene related, but about them. So it's not really like a list. Like I wouldn't say, you know, perseveres, you know, the cracks their knuckles all the time. It wouldn't be like those things for me. It would be more like, you know, there's a day when she has a discussion with her mother about, and that gives us something about both characters, and then I just kind of go back to it and say, no, is that going to be useful or is that not going to be useful? So like I said, the scenes can be, reordered and then connected. And I feel like, scenes work for me because they're kind of short. I usually write with really short chapters. And, it's rare for me to go over 7 pages with a chapter in these middle grade books. Which I think is kind of, which I like. I think it's, attention span, my own and the readers. And I think also, I think I'm also very attuned to books as read alouds. And I think, oh, stopping point, stopping point, where we could pause and set the book down. And, maybe even sit down and process something that we've read. I think I maybe just like totally didn't answer your question. If you want to ask it again, you can.
That's okay. I think you answered a better one.
Didn't mean to. It just happens.
Well, no, I want to ask you about your sentences. So you know what, such as well. So I noticed lots of really short sentences, and I know that's one of your mottos for writers. If anybody goes to your website, they can read your mottos for writers, and you say that shorten your sentences and cut your adverbs. And I notice you do that with the sentences, but not with necessarily the paragraph. So you might have a long paragraph that's made up of 15, 17 sentences. They're very short sentences, but not the paragraphs so much, which read very, very smooth, very quickly. I did read parts of this out loud to my child, and it flows nicely.
Thank you.
What's your rule of thumb as far as paragraphs versus sentences, and why are short sentences so desirable?
I think short sentences are sometimes desirable. And I think that, for instance, the sentences in both Anybody Here Seen Frenchie and my 2018 book, which was The Truth as Told by Mason Buttle, I think that these had to do, the length of the sentences in these had to do with the thought patterns of the characters. I think that's where the match came from. A character like Lydia in A Home for Goddesses and Dogs is a little bit more of a long thinker. And so I think that maybe, like, I didn't know what you just told me. I've never really looked back at the writing and thought that about it. I'm sure you're not wrong, but where that the paragraphs can be long, but the sentences are short. But I think that has to do with me hearing the character in my ear, hearing the way that they're thinking. That's probably it coming through them. And if you look at Frenchie, and if you look at like one of the other points of view, I think you might see longer sentences. I'm not sure whether you read like one of Maxine's chapters or not. And at one point, Maxine gets a little loaded up on some painkillers actually, and her sentences change then too. So I think that for me has lots to do with, like I say, with the character's thought, the character's situation. Yeah. Funny.
So with the prose, as much as you can, you're trying to give us a peek inside their mental state and if they were there editing it and organizing it with you, this is how they would want it to be on the page.
I think so. I mean, to me, it may sound a little hokey, but to me, it's their voice coming through, into my ink, and so, yeah, I think that's how, and sometimes I will reread something and think, I think he would even have a more brief thought about that, or maybe needs to have an additional thought about it. But it's sort of, it takes the onus off me. I almost feel not responsible for some of it, but then I have to go be responsible in the revision. But I try to let those characters flow right down. Right down onto the page. So I always say right by ear.
With an editor, what for me? She was on painkillers.
I know. Yeah. Most people, I think, understand that. You know it from the storyline too, where she just gets so confused by something she's seeing, and it's even more confusing because her mind's not quite right. So anyway.
Editor just has to say, okay, well, I guess that's how we're going to leave it. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about autism, and then I promise, esteemed audience, we'll move on to flying saucers and ghosts. We never leave that out. But with autism, obviously, when they say, and for a good reason, if you've met someone with autism, you've met a person with autism. So there is no, this is how an autistic character sounds or is consistently. But what kind of research do you do? How do you get yourself in a position where you can write about these autistic characters credibly?
Well, first of all, I have my fingers crossed hard that I have done it credibly. I mean, I think that, I'm this is 9 books in, that powerful observing, I think, is first. I also, I went to the autistic community. There are, there are autistic people posting really useful YouTube videos. They are doing blog posts. There are articles being written. There's a lot of information and a lot of help now out there, or a lot of suggestions. A lot of the community is bonded, and the parents are finding help with each other and with the schools. And I think that's the other thing, is acknowledgement now, in learning environments is way more than it was. I don't even want to tell you, I am 62 years old. So, I was in school a really long time ago, and I can now think back on who the autistic kids were, and or who probably were autistic, and life must have been hell. I can't imagine, and nothing good or kind or understanding seemed to be being done for them. And I think that that I am really, really happy has changed. And yeah, I think that we don't have to, none of us have to really go far to find that we know someone who is autistic or has been on the spectrum, or who has characteristics that could place them on the spectrum, but where they may not be diagnosed that way as being autistic in the end. But I think still acknowledging and seeing the characteristics may help with maybe something like an individual education plan for them, or just strategies, things like that. But I also talked to parents. I thought that was a really important place to go, especially when I was writing about a child who doesn't speak. And so, there was help there and suggestions there. And one of the things I heard repeatedly and read repeatedly is so very true. The autism spectrum is so vast that there's someone that might say to you, show me a kid with autism and I'll show you a kid with autism, and actually what we want to say is an autistic kid, and I'll show you one autistic kid. My daughter explained it to me best. She said, it's not a kid with autism. She said, Mom, no one would say to you, Leslie has shortness. You would say, Leslie is short. So you are, there's a difference there. So, like I said, show me an autistic kid, and I'll show you just one autistic kid, meaning that it's all so different. There may be some things that fall similar, but it is a huge, it is a huge spectrum. And, Asperger's falls on the autism spectrum. And that is actually often really high functioning, very, very talkative, very verbal. And, we have brilliant people. There are lists everywhere of artists and in all fields of the arts that are autistic. And I think that we're finding ways to celebrate them, and to help them live their best lives. They just need, they just need to have that, have that entry into the world like everyone else does, the same sort of opportunities and things like that. So yeah.
Well, that was an incredibly thoughtful response. And the only way I could possibly follow that up is, Leslie Connor, have you ever seen a flying saucer and or a ghost?
I haven't seen a flying saucer, but I certainly acknowledge the possibility of that. Yeah, I don't think I could be a thinking person and cancel that idea out. Ghosts, yes, I have seen ghosts, one in particular. And, actually it was an incredibly touching moment that meant a lot to me. We lost a kid in our community at one point, and a kid I was close enough to that, I could say that I loved him. And, we went through these hard weeks of grief. And, I just, how do you reach, how do you reconcile, how do you, there's no closure really, I don't think. But one night I was asleep and aware of, first sort of a little bit of an outline that came slowly beside the bed. And I really just, I know it almost sounds like arrogant to talk about, but I really felt like he came to say, came to give me some kind of a peace, like just being a really good boy, good kid that he had been. And yeah, so yeah, I was really moved, and talked to his mom later and said, "Do you want to know what a great boy you have?" And so yeah, I think ghosts for sure.
Does that give you some assurance and a little bit of calmness about death and about the eventuality of we're all going to go on to see whatever it is on the other side?
Yeah, yeah, I am calm about that, actually. I have more thoughts about getting there before things get icky and expensive for me here on Earth. So yeah, definitely, it doesn't really scare me. I'm scared of missing the physical presence of folks I don't want leaving before me. But yeah, I have peaceful, I guess overall, I probably, of most people I know, I have pretty peaceful feelings about death and moving on. Funny thing about me, sometimes we have these discussions about religion and what people believe in terms of the afterlife. And I have sometimes maintained that you get with the thing that you believe in. And I think that I think, well, why not? Why wouldn't that be possible? Wasn't that part of how life was on Earth too? Isn't that what we experienced here? So, I think it matters not that much what each of us thinks will happen to us. Well, yeah, not too much more to say about that, but it's just a thought that occurs to me a lot.
I love the idea of like a classic, the St. Peter at the gate scenario. And you get there and he's able to, look over your mind and see what you thought. Like, that's what you thought the afterlife was going to be? Oh my God, wait till you see this. This is, you won't even believe how much different this is.
Yeah, I don't know. It's so interesting. The other thing I sometimes share discussions with close friends about is, first timers here on Earth, like it's sort of like yeah, they've been here before. They've got kind of like they're operating on a plane where a person feels like, they seem so calm and content in their life. There's no way they couldn't have had some practice before this, and they've come here, they've come around again a couple of times or something like that, and whereas someone who seems like kind of unsettled and nervous yeah, I don't know. There's like a first timer. As first timer, still lots of wisdom to gain or whatever. But some people just seem to come with more, and I swear it's because they've had previous lives that informed them.
Well, hopefully it works like a ski resort where there's like bunny slopes. So like maybe your first time down, you're a lightning bug. Well, let's see if you can handle being a lightning bug, and then maybe next time around we'll try raccoon, and we'll just work our way up from there.
Now, see, I love that. That's right up my alley. I love that idea.
I'm watching our time, and I'm seeing that it's slipping away. It always does when a great conversation. It effortlessly flows away from us. I did want to ask you about a couple of these other writing mottos, and then we'll get a little bit of last minute writing advice from you, and we'll think about calling it an evening. We talked about keeping the sentences short. You also say, don't keep anything in your manuscript that you don't believe to be beautiful or useful.
Yeah.
What are some things that wouldn't be beautiful or useful, but that might try to sneak into a manuscript anyway?
Yeah. So first of all, it's a total steal from William Morris, the designer and artist, and who said that about our homes. Don't keep anything you don't believe to be beautiful and useful. And I'm really bad at that, actually, because I like stuff, and I like so many different things that I don't pare down well at my house. Although I've started to do that recently, and strangely been really hitting it. Yeah, I mean, I think it's my way of asking myself when looking at the manuscript, is this sort of long sentence really doing good work for you? Have you already said this? It's a way of editing, I think. Did you is there anything I added that's kind of, too much in there for me and not in there enough for the story or the writer? Was I kind of hung up on some little idea I thought was so clever, and would the manuscript be stronger if I cut it? That would mean it wasn't really that useful there. So that's what I would cut that, that's what I would hope to cut. It's just a way of trying to present a better package, present a cleaner package to the future readers. Yeah.
You cut things like that, do you keep them in a file to hopefully maybe find their way into another project someday, or are they just gone forever?
Usually they're just not that great and they're gone.
You are far more honest than I am. I save them in files, and then I'll go back and look at them like, oh, there's a whole bunch of brilliant stuff in there. Nope, there's nothing salvageable.
So during a project, I will sometimes keep, one of those long, skinny lists on the wall and put down, put things. I mean, same with the note cards. It's like, that's when I'm having like this little moment of cleverness, and maybe in the end it works and maybe it doesn't. I mean, sometimes they're gems, let's face it, and you don't want to forget them. If I hadn't sat up that night and written down those two little things on the 3x5 card, one, I wouldn't have the story to tell. And two, I wouldn't have the story to write. So there you go.
Let's see, another motto of yours is treat everything you write like a read aloud. Do you read aloud your stories, and who do you read them to?
Yes, I do. I was thinking about a question I've seen you ask before about, if you could sit down with any writer, who would it be? And, I think my answer is my critique group to that. And that is where I read out loud. Yes, I think that I think you have to hear your stories out loud. I mean, if you don't choose critique group for that, that's fine. But sit and read them to yourself or your dog or your cat or whoever will listen. that has so much to do with voice. And I feel like there are a lot of manuscripts I read that could be improved on if they'd been heard out loud. You would feel the little bit cringy, gawky part of it, and you would get rid of it, and you would end up with that cleaner manuscript that, had a beautiful and useful lines in it, and not some gook, or just, I mean, even just when we read out loud to each other at our Tuesday tables, my critique group and I, sometimes we'll just hear something that gives our, I'll read it out loud and I'll say, "Ooh, I'm not keeping that." Never mind. But you also hear other little sort of writing faux pas and things like that. It's just a great way to catch. Just making more catches. Of things that you really don't want in there. But like I say, they do think that the process is so much happening by ear that to hear it out loud is really important.
In your critique group, you meet twice a month and you have breakfast, right? There's 8 of you.
Yeah, that's us.
Yeah. How long have you been together, and how did the pandemic impact your meetings?
We have been together in some form or another for 25 years. And for pandemic, we went from every second and fourth Tuesday to every Tuesday, and we went via Zoom. So we got together more often. We needed, we all needed the sort of being in touch just socially. And we really did like that. We've gone back to meeting in person. Not so long ago though, actually. It's interesting. I mean, we every time there's been variant issues or someone has traveled or something, we often will make an adjustment for that. Maybe one person will Zoom in to the breakfast table or whatever when the rest of us are in person. But we're very cautious about each other. But yeah, I mean, I was really grateful for Zoom during that time, and so was everybody. And it was kind of fun too, because we were on the 40-minute Zoom plan. We didn't have the unlimited, so it'd be kind of like, okay, I'm gonna go fill my cup, or I'm gonna run to the bathroom, or whatever, And it was great. It worked very, very well for us, and kept us from, and I think it kept us cheerful during the isolation. We didn't feel so isolated, and we were writing, and we were, we read a lot, so that was great. We worked.
And with your critique meetings, I know you do the social part first, and then you get down to business. Are you just reading aloud what you brought and prepared for that session, or is anybody doing reading before the session and then coming in with notes? How are you doing that part?
Yeah, all of it happens, on the screen or at the table. We don't pre-read. Occasionally, if we're, occasionally we'll ask for, does anybody have time to read, a fix I made on chapter 2 before I meet my deadline, whatever, something like that. We might ask each other for, but no, we're reading sort of fresh, and we reread if we need to. Sometimes we'll hear somebody's novel for years running. And that's kind of how novel writing goes, I think. We also share news when we network a bit, that kind of thing. Catch up on what's been going on in the publishing world. Some of us are doing different things. Some of us travel more than others. Some of us do more school visits than others. So we're it's a great tool, for that. I have some other writer groups that I meet with too, but we don't do critique. So this is the one that, is really, most about story for me, and about hearing the work out loud. And you learn a lot when you hear someone else's work out loud, but you learn the most when you hear your own work out loud. You go, oh, yeah, okay, I'm gonna fix that, or just that you're feeling like it's running very long, or every once in a while, one of us will drop a page and go, I am boring myself, or whatever. It's all good, it's all good feedback for you, for the story. It's all about making that better,
And I'm going to ask just a little bit of in the weeds questions, and then I'll stop it, I promise. Okay. But there's 8 of you, and you're not reading your own work. Somebody else is reading your work, so you can hear it. Are
No,
all
I'm
of
reading it.
presenting?
We
Oh, you're
each read our own. We do read
okay.
our own. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So do you? I mean, I'm assuming there's some limit. I mean, you can't be there for 5-7 hours. Do you have a set limit? I can read 3 pages. I can read 5. 1.
No, I mean, we're actually really, really patient with each other. I mean, generally speaking, in terms of sort of meeting, using the meeting as a deadline, I mean, the pace that most of us are at, we might be lucky to have 3 chapters for a meeting every 2 weeks or something like that. I mean, I don't think any of us write at a super fast pace. But no, I mean, and also there are times when not everyone will have something to read. And so, we usually find that out before we settle down, how many people are reading today. And then we gauge our social, hour or 40 minutes or whatever, we gauge the time we're going to spend on that and get to the work, yeah. So that, we kind of allow for each other, but, we'll stay at that, we'll stay from, 9 a.m. to 2:30 if we need to. So we will, yeah, we're hardcore.
So is everybody else kind of following along and making notes in the manuscript, or just listening and then giving you their immediate thoughts afterward?
We usually go by chapter, and you finish a chapter and you usually get some feedback, and or the questions on their mind, and sometimes the question on someone's mind is simply like a matter of sort of tension and momentum, and it's like, I'll get to that in the next chapter, and then then we move on. But it's neat to know what they're thinking about as they're hearing the story. That to me is really useful feedback. I want you to be looking at the pair of red socks hanging from the tree. I want you to be looking at that. So I'm glad that helps me to know, oh, that is an image that is standing out and they're remembering it.
I am deeply jealous. This sounds like a wonderful group.
Oh, it's wonderful. Wonderful. They're my heart and soul. We're also very good friends after all this time. So that's really special, that we help each other out when there's other things going on, like knee replacements and stuff like that. If somebody has something happening in the family and could use a meal, we are our own small community in that way too.
Oh, that sounds just wonderful.
It is. It's good.
Well, I promised that I would start to bring this thing in toward a landing. So there's one last writing motto that you've got listed that I love. I wanted to ask you about, and that's write what you can't ignore. What can't you ignore?
Yeah. I mean, I think we started to talk about this earlier. I can't remember if we were recording at the time, but you hear that write what you know, or write what you want to know. And for me, it's write what you can't ignore. Something sticking to you is likely to have some kind of draw for a reader, I believe. And like I said, I think that's I sort of trust in that. If I can't stop thinking about this, perhaps it's that interesting, and hopefully I can put it to story.
Well, my last question for you is always some variation. If you could go back toward the start of your career, middle career, wherever would be useful for you, and offering yourself some writing advice that would have made a difference for you and might make a difference for anyone who's watching or listening to us right now, and that might even be a potential candidate for a 5th motto. What would you go back and tell yourself?
I think for me, I think it's something that I think this is advice people don't need anymore, because I think they know it better than I knew it. I mean, I'm going to sound like such a dope, but I think I thought that I needed to kind of sit back and see whether a book did all right before I submitted some more to that editor and got going. And I know that people were saying to me, oh, what are you going to throw at her next? What are you going to throw at her next? And all I could think was, well, don't we have to see like whether this book does anything in order for them to know whether they want another one. And I don't know why I had that sort of hang up in my mind. I mean, I was already, I did follow that, okay, now, it's being published, you'll get your revisions. In the meantime, write the next book. I was doing that. I was writing it. But I think I hesitated to show things. I think I felt like there was proving ground that needed to happen or something. And it's totally erroneous. I don't know why I thought that. They can certainly decide. But yeah, I think I probably would suggest, being ready to move another manuscript toward the process, even when you're still working, even when you're still waiting for revisions on one, be doing that. But like I said, I think most people know that these days.
Well, then knowing it and putting it in action are two different things.
I realize. I felt a certain shyness about having had something accepted, I think. And I think I would have given myself a little elbow and said, now don't be shy. Don't think that's the only book that you have in you, go ahead. There might be another really good idea coming up here. You got to trust this once, you got to trust it again and go, so I think so maybe my advice would be, be less shy.
Well, I'm sure that all the writers and artists listening and watching to us will take that to heart, and there's no shyness amongst the writers. I'm sure, not even an issue.
They probably got it knocked. Yeah.
It has been a privilege and a pleasure to talk with you tonight. I appreciate how generous you've been with your time. Where can esteemed audience find you online, follow you on social media, and all that good stuff?
Oh yeah, I meant to have this ready. I'm not so much of a Twitter person. I show up there every once in a while, but that's not really my bag. I am at Hey Leslie Connor on Instagram, and that's where I do most of my posting. I did finally set it up to also go to Facebook. So, I don't know I'm just Leslie Connor, I think, at Facebook. I'm not sure. I can't remember how that part works. And then, my website is just leslieconnor.com. And you can also get to the Instagram posts there. But that's my favorite piece of social media, I guess, is I think maybe because I became to this very image oriented. One thing that you can see posted there is an important part of Frenchie, and I'll kind of leave you with this. The cover, I don't know if it will show up on the screen well, but one of the details on the cover, there is a deer in the background there. And that deer I did see in real life. It is a piebald deer. And I saw it here on our property for about 22 months running. It was here. They have a short lifespan, unfortunately. But that became a real little gem. It was another one of the things that kind of fell into the story and I knew was going to be important because, of course, the minute I saw that animal, the research began. I was like, what am I looking at here? Very beautiful thing. But those, you will find posts, if you go back a ways, you'll find the posts of the piebald deer. We did get several, decent / fuzzy pictures of it. And I'll be posting more of those as I start to promote Frenchie and start to kind of do some launch posts, where we are 3 months out, I guess. It's February 15th, 2022. So coming up. But yeah, look for the piebald deer. So special.
Esteemed audience, if you're listening to us as this episode releases, pre-order your copy right now. If you're listening to us later, that good news, it's already available. You can be downloading it to your device as you're watching or listening to us. As always, for more information about me and more important, for information about the show, interviews with thousands of editors, literary agents, authors, all my favorite people, go to middlegradeninja.com. Download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. It will change your life. And God willing, I'm alive. I'll see you next week.